Hello everyone, this is Jacob Ames, Applications Engineer with Hawkridge Systems, here today with part 3 of our SOLIDWORKS Basics for New Users series. And in this installment we'll be introducing some of the most basic and widely used features in SOLIDWORKS, exploring their various properties and applications so that you can get a head start on your next project. Now, just as a quick reminder, be sure to check out parts 1 and 2 of this series if you haven't already, where we break down the basics of the SOLIDWORKS user interface, as well as some sketching techniques. You will want to be up to speed on both of those before viewing this video. Now, in this example, we're going to be modeling the cowbell seen here on the screen. The reason I chose this model is because it requires the use of several essential SOLIDWORKS features, such as the extruded boss. We also have an extruded cut. We have revolved bosses, fillets, and shell commands. And those are just a handful of some of the most basic and essential features inside SOLIDWORKS. Now, there are several combinations of features that could recreate this same geometry that we have on the screen, but this is going to give us an opportunity to view several commands at once. Now, before we begin, it is worth noting that there are two separate categories of features rather in SOLIDWORKS. We have sketched features and we have applied features. Anytime you hear me refer to a sketched feature, this is a feature that requires a sketch in order to be used. This would include the boss extrude command. We have a revolved boss and a cut extrude. All of those are going to require sketches in order to be used. On the other hand, we have applied features that are applied directly to existing geometry, and both of our fillets here as well as the shell command fall into that category. No sketch required. Additionally, when you're first getting familiar with features, you're going to find that several of them have similar names. We have an extruded boss, for example, and then an extruded cut, or we have a revolved boss and a revolved cut. What do those names mean? Well, the first part of the name, extruded or revolved, for example, indicate how the feature is created, either by extruding a profile along a straight path or by revolving it around an axis. And the second part of that name, either boss or cut, just simply indicates whether material is being added or it's being removed as a result of that operation. So you can tell a lot about a feature just strictly based on its name. One last thing before we begin, I just want to make sure everybody remembers that you can search for commands inside SOLIDWORKS. You may have to use the drop-down arrow to select the commands option, but once you have, you can simply type in the name of the command that you're looking for, and you'll have direct access to it, or you can have SOLIDWORKS find it for you. So that's going to be very valuable, especially for you newer users out there. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on this design. Of course, we will be creating it from scratch. So I have a blank part here ready to go, and we're going to get started on our first feature, which is, of course, the extruded boss. This is the most basic of all SOLIDWORKS features, and it just extrudes a sketch along a straight line path to add material. As a sketched feature, the first thing we have to do is create a sketch. If you remember from part 2, the easiest way to do this is to access the Sketch tab in the Command Manager and choose the first icon, which is the sketch icon. Once you do this, because this is the first sketch that we've created in this design, all 3 default planes will be presented graphically, and we can simply select the top plane in this case. That will take us into sketch mode, and rather than using simple lines, we can take advantage of the center point rectangle to create a quick rectangular profile for us. If this is not the default icon for this command, just use the drop-down arrow to the right of it to choose center rectangle. And once you have, your first selection is going to be the center point of that rectangle, and the second selection is going to be one of the corner points. So quick and painless, you have a rectangle there. In order to fully define this, you'll want to access the Smart Dimension command, and we're going to select one of the vertical line segments. We'll give this a dimension of 50, and remember, for the first dimension that you place, it's going to scale the sketch for you, and so it's not going to look like it did anything, but our second dimension here for the width at 100 is going to stretch it just a little bit. That's all it takes to fully define this sketch, so we can exit the Smart Dimension command. We'll come back over to the confirmation corner and exit this sketch, and we're going to then move over to the Features tab, and we're going to choose Extruded Boss. Now, notice very quickly, I have the sketch selected right now. If I have the whole sketch selected in the Feature Manager design tree and I choose Extruded Boss, it's going to go straight into the Property Manager and allow us to start creating that feature, no problem. However, if I click in white space and I clear my selection so the sketch is no longer selected, watch what happens when I choose that Extruded Boss. I'm going to get a yellow dialog here that tells me right off the bat, select a plane on which to sketch the feature cross-section. Well, I already have a sketch. So if you read carefully, the second option is to choose an existing sketch to use for the feature. So if you run into this dialog, don't panic. All you have to do at this point is select the sketch graphically on the screen, and you'll be ready to go with your feature. As soon as we get into the property manager for the extruded boss, you'll find that your view is rotated to isometric automatically, and you can see a yellow preview that reflects what this feature is going to look like. This property manager is essentially the brains of this operation and allows us to define a number of different parameters, including where the feature actually starts. That's this first box that says from. Typically, we keep this set to the sketch plane. This would make sure that the feature actually starts right where the sketch was created, but you do have other options here, such as starting from a specific surface or a vertex, or maybe just an offset from the original sketch. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to leave that at sketch plane. The direction 1 box allows a number of different things to happen. First of all, you'll see this reverse direction button. This allows you to toggle whether the sketch is extruded up or down. If you were on another plane, it may be left or right, but essentially it allows you to reverse the direction that you're creating the feature in. The drop-down box right next to it is what is known as the end condition, and this affects how the feature terminates. Normally, by default, this is going to be set to blind, and this allows you to input in the box here that has millimeters in it. It allows you to input a depth for this feature, and that's what we're going to use. But just as a quick survey of some of the others that are available, we could go up to a specific vertex or surface. We could be offset from a surface, or even midplane, which would extrude this equally in opposite directions for symmetry. And depending on the other geometry and other aspects that you already have in your design, you may have other options available here. We're going to leave this at blind, and in fact, we're going to go ahead and set the depth to 100. So make sure to get that value set to 100. When you press enter here just once, you'll see that the preview will update. You may have to zoom out to see that. If you press enter again, it is going to complete the command, so make sure when you type in that value, you only press enter once. And then we have the draft command. This allows you to apply draft to this feature, which will narrow the profile as it moves along its extrude path. So what we want to do here in order to get a nice tapered shape to the cowbell is we want to turn draft on by clicking the button and then typing in a value for the degrees, the draft angle. So we're going to type in 5 degrees and press enter once, and you'll see that profile narrows as it moves up along the extrude path. Last thing that's worth mentioning, because it's a big old box here, is this direction of extrusion. Normally, we don't make any changes here, but if you wanted the feature to extrude in a direction other than normal to the sketch profile, you could choose, say, a sketch entity or a model edge to influence this direction, but we'll leave that blank for now. The remaining boxes here, if you want to explore them, you can expand these group boxes by clicking the arrows next to them. They're a little bit more complicated, so we'll leave those for another video. Once your property manager looks like mine does, go ahead and click OK, and that will create your first feature. So we have that nice drafted boss extrude there, and we can go ahead and begin with features 2 and 3, which are both going to be fillets. Fillets are classified as applied features, and as such, they don't require a sketch in order to be used. Fillets serve to round off edges or corners by adding or removing material depending on whether the edge is internal or external. It should be noted that fillets of different sizes do need to be created in separate commands, so you cannot combine multiple sizes of fillets. And typically it's best to create your largest fillets first and work down to the smaller fillets. So to achieve the rounded shape that we're looking for in this cowbell, we're going to add 2 sets of fillets. Again, we don't need a sketch, so we can go straight to the Features tab of the Command Manager. We're going to click the Fillet command, and the first thing that I want to point out, you want to make sure that you're in manual mode. The Fillet Expert is great for a number of different filleting operations, and it is covered in another video, so if you'd like to see it, go ahead and take a look at that video. We're going to keep it simple and use manual mode, and we're also going to use the constant size fillet. That's the simplest of all, and we can go ahead and get started. Now, when you're making fillet selections, you can select either edges or faces. You can also select features and loops, which gets a bit more complex, but typically it's edges and faces. When you choose an edge to fillet, it only fillets that edge or anything tangent to that edge. When you select a face to fillet, it's automatically going to select all of the edges of that face and apply the fillet to it. We're going to leave everything else default, but you do have a fillet parameters box which can change the size. And in our second fillet feature, we will be changing the size, but we're going to leave the fillet method and the profile alone. All right, so we'll make some quick selections here. We're going to choose all the longer edges of our part, and you may need to rotate the model in order to see all of these edges. And as you make selections, you'll notice the yellow preview appears. And this is going to give you a good idea of what your end result is going to look like. So pay attention to that feedback. If you need to adjust the size, that's under the fillet parameters box right here for radius. We're going to leave that at 10 millimeters, and that's really all there is to it. We'll go ahead and click OK. So we have a nice tapered and rounded shape for this cowbell. We want to follow that up with another fillet feature. This one's going to be smaller, and since it's a different size, we're going to create it after our 10 millimeter fillet there. So we'll simply click the fillet command once again. This time we're going to choose an entire face. Just as an example, when we choose the top face here, all of the edges of that face are going to be included, but that 10 millimeters is a little bit large. So let's go ahead and set that to 5 millimeters. That'll look a little bit better. Once again, simply click OK to complete that fillet, and now we have a nice rounded shape to our cowbell. Now, as a quick reminder, one of the biggest benefits of SOLIDWORKS is that if you make a mistake, you can always go back and fix it. So if you ever need to edit a feature, simply come over to the Feature Manager design tree, find the feature in question, and give it a right click. When you do this, you'll see a shortcut menu, which has a bunch of text options, and at the top, you'll also see what's called a context menu, and the first icon is likely going to be the Edit Feature command. If you click this button, it's going to take you right back to the property manager where you originally defined that feature, and you can make any adjustments as needed. So if you need to change the size of this fillet, you can go ahead and do that. You click OK, and the model will update, no problem. So you want to be familiar with those editing tools just in case you need to make some changes. With that, let's move on to our fourth feature, which is going to be a shell. In order for this to be a functional bell, we have to make sure that it's hollowed out. The shell is a applied feature as well, and while this could be done in theory with a well-crafted extruded cut, it's going to be a lot easier to use a shell command because it allows you to specify a wall thickness, choose faces to remove, and that's pretty much it. It takes care of the rest for you automatically. So let's go ahead and start a shell and see what that looks like. Once again, in the Features tab of the Command Manager, we have the shell command, and again, very simple property manager. The first input box here is the thickness. What is your wall thickness going to be? We're going to set that to 2.5 millimeters. This is going to be a pretty thin design, so go ahead and type in 2.5 there, and then choose faces to remove. Now, you can choose nothing for this box, but if you do that, it's not going to look like anything changed in your model. What will happen if you don't choose any faces to remove is it'll hollow out this design, but you'll have to take a cross section in order to see that. We actually want to remove the whole bottom of this. So in this blue box, we're going to click the bottom face of the bell. That's really all there is to it. We can go ahead and click OK. These other options here allow you to set multiple thicknesses in different areas, but those get a little bit more complex. So we'll just go ahead and confirm this command, and you'll see what it's done here. It's actually hollowed out the whole inside, and we don't have to worry about sketching a new profile for a cut and all the other complexities that would come with trying to accomplish that with an extruded cut. Our next design feature is going to be a loop for the top of this bell, and it's important that this feature be created after the shell because we don't want the loop itself to be hollowed out like the bell was. This is going to be created through the use of a revolved boss feature. You'll see that's the second icon in the Features tab, and this adds material by revolving a sketch around an axis. Now, remember, once geometry has been created in your model, any flat surface can be used as a sketching surface. So in this case, since we want the loop to be at the top of the design, we're going to use this face highlighted in blue for our sketch. You can pre-select this if you want, but if you don't, move over to the Sketch tab, start your sketch, and then simply choose the top face. If you already have it pre-selected, you won't get this yellow dialog. It'll take you straight into sketch mode. So we'll choose that top face. You'll see that because of my system options, I'm rotated automatically normal to this sketch orientation, and then we can go ahead and begin creating our sketch. Now, first thing that you want to do, if you're using a revolved feature, whether it be a boss or a cut, you probably want something to revolve around. I'm going to use a center line for this. by using the drop down next to the line command and choosing center line. I'm going to attach this right to the origin. The direction, whether it be up or down, is not important, although it does need to be vertical. And the length is not important either. So just make sure you choose a direction either up or down and make sure that you capture that vertical relation as well. And this is going to serve as our axis to actually revolve the profile around. And because it's construction geometry, it does not get factored into the profile of the feature. And once you're done, you can go ahead and press escape to exit that command. And similar to when we created our first boss extrude, we're going to use another center point rectangle. I want to make sure that this is aligned horizontally with respect to the origin, and I'm going to create something that looks about like this, so it's going to be taller than it is wide. We'll follow that up with some smart dimensions. We're going to give this a height of 15 by clicking the vertical line segment, typing in 15, and then we'll also set the width to 5 millimeters. And then finally, we need to add one more dimension here. We need a offset from the origin. That's going to be set to 15 as well. That's going to serve as our radius. And then last but not least, we need a sketch relation as well from the center point of this rectangle. We can zoom in to make that a little bit more clear. I've selected the center point of the rectangle. Hold Control and select the origin to select both of them at the same time. And then from the property manager, simply choose the horizontal relation to ensure that the center point is lined up horizontally with respect to the origin. Again, it's very important that that center line be in place. You don't want to forget this center line because otherwise you won't have anything to revolve around. You need something to revolve around for a revolved feature. Once this sketch is complete, simply confirm it, move over to the Features tab of the Command Manager, and this time choose Revolved Boss. When you do this, notice once again we have the sketch pre-selected. If you have the whole sketch pre-selected, you're in good shape. When you click this and the sketch is pre-selected, you're taken to the property manager where you can choose an axis of revolution. You'll simply choose the construction line and your feature will be created. You may need to rotate off normal in order to be able to see this properly. So go to an isometric view so you can see what's happening here. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to show a very common mistake that happens here, and this is usually the result of accidentally or intentionally clearing your cursor prior to creating the feature. Now the sketch is not selected. So if the sketch is not selected and I try to start a revolved boss, it's going to ask me once again to choose an existing sketch or create a new one. Now what's important to understand here is the very first selection that you make in the property manager for a revolved boss is actually the axis of revolution. So if I choose something other than the construction line, I'm going to get an interesting preview. This is incorrect. This is not what we're looking for. Now you can still recover from this at this point, but you would need to right-click the axis of revolution, you'd need to clear that out, and you would need to choose the construction line. As long as you've done that properly, you should get this feature looking like you see here on the screen. So beware of that. If you want to make sure to protect yourself, just make sure to click the sketch in the property manager before you start the revolved feature, and then it won't automatically try to select the axis of revolution for you. You can do that yourself by selecting the construction line. Now, even if you've properly selected the axis of revolution, what you'll find is that this loop continues 360 degrees all the way through the inside of the model. And that's not what we're trying to do. We don't want to add any additional material to the inside of this, so we need to adjust the direction 1 angle. This is similar. It's basically an analogy to the depth of an extruded boss. So rather than a 360 degree rotation, we'll set it to 180. Press enter once to update the profile, or the preview rather, and you'll see that while we do have the correct amount of rotation, we're actually on the underside of the bell. So we have a reverse button here too. Simply click the reverse button to reverse that, and we have a loop at the top of our cowbell. And of course we have end conditions here. Many of the properties of this property manager are going to be similar to the extruded boss, but there are some differences. And one other thing that I want to talk about for just a second is this merge result option. You won't see this in the first feature that you create, and you'll only see this feature for commands that add material. You want to make sure that this is checked on. If it's not, anytime a feature is interfering or coincident with existing geometry, it would be created as a separate body. So to make sure everything merges together nicely, you want to make sure that merge result is checked on. There are some advanced techniques that will actually disable this, but we're not going to cover those. So stick with merge result checked on for now, and simply click OK. And with that, we have the loop for the top of our cowbell, and we can move on to the final feature, which is an extruded cut. We're going to create a cut that runs straight through the center of this bell through the loop for the attachment of a handle and the clapper for this bell. To do this, we're actually going to be using one of the default planes, in fact the top plane, in order to cut all the way through the entire model. So rather than using an existing face to sketch on, we're going to be using the top plane. Now, this is a great strategy, but one thing that you'll notice is if we go to the Sketch tab and we start a new sketch, it's going to ask us for a plane or a face as it normally does, but because it's not our first feature, the planes don't show graphically. So what are we supposed to do? Well, this is a good opportunity to discuss the Flyout Feature Manager design tree. Anytime you need to see a property manager and the feature manager at the same time, you can use the Flyout Feature Manager by clicking the small right arrow next to the part name in the graphics area. And when you do this, everything that you've created so far in your design is going to be visible for selection. And we can simply choose the top plane and start a sketch. Now, as a shortcut, the way that I like to start sketches, I find this very easy and very convenient. When you see the feature manager, find the plane that you want to start a sketch on, simply right click it and use the context menu, again the thin ribbon of icons just above the shortcut menu, and choose sketch. And it's really that easy. You don't have to worry about expanding the Flyout Feature Manager, but that Flyout Feature Manager can be used for a lot of other great things as well. Now, what you're going to find here as we use the circle command, and we're going to start a circle on the origin. We'll go ahead and place that and give it a smart dimension of 7.5 millimeters. But what you're going to find is that it appears, at least from this perspective, that we're not actually sketching on the top plane. It looks like we're sketching on the very top of the model, but that's not true. This is just a matter of perspective. So if I were to rotate around, you can see that that sketch is actually locked to the orientation of that top plane. And even if we were to continue sketching at this point, it may not look like we're sketching on that plane, but we are locked to the top plane, so we don't have to worry about that orientation. And this, sometimes you're actually going to have to sketch off normal in order to capture the relations and the dimensions that you want. And by the way, dimensions, we haven't covered this yet, but dimensions don't have to be contained to the sketch itself. You can actually create sketch dimensions between sketch entities and model edges, for example, or model faces. That's a very common strategy. So once the sketch is completed, we'll exit the sketch once again. We're going to go to the Features tab. And this time, rather than the Extruded Boss, you want to make sure you're using the Extruded Cut. If we were to create an Extruded Boss, we would be adding material. This is a common issue that we see as well. People think that they're removing material when they're actually adding material, and it looks like they've accomplished nothing. So make sure that you're choosing the Extruded Cut. You'll notice that automatically it appears that the preview is cutting material downward. That's not going to do a whole lot for us, so we want to use the reverse button. And this time, rather than using a blind depth, I actually want to make sure that this cut goes all the way through the bell, no matter what happens. If it changes size, if it changes shape, we want to make sure it goes all the way through, both the bell and the loop above it. So I'm going to change my end condition. One of the really valuable end conditions here is through all. This makes sure that the cut continues all the way through the geometric extents of the model, and this is a really good way to build intelligence into your model so that if it were to ever change size, it'll still continue all the way through, and you're always going to have that same behavior for the cut. That's really all there is to it. We'll click OK to create that cut, and just like that, we have the finished cowbell model. Now remember, should you ever need to make changes to your design, you have complete access to do this. It's a simple right click on the feature. From the context menu, choose the Edit Feature command. Now, one of the common themes that we see in training is it can be difficult to understand whether you need to edit the feature or you need to edit the sketch. So if you ever need to edit something like the depth of the feature or the draft of a feature or the end condition, in those cases, you'll want to be editing the feature itself. But if you ever need to change the profile size or the actual sketch shape, you want to edit the sketch, assuming that your feature has one. If it's a sketched feature, you'll also notice a second button when you right-click to edit the sketch. This would take you back into sketch mode where you could adjust dimensions, you could add additional sketch entities or remove sketch entities if needed, and actually change the profile of that feature. Okay, so you have full edit control there. Additionally, thinking ahead when you're editing features is going to be very important, especially when you're editing features near the top of the design tree, because there are downstream implications. And if you make extreme edits to features that are very high in the tree, you may end up breaking features down the line. So pay attention to that. Try to focus on understanding what the impacts will be if you make changes to features, and that should keep you in good shape. In this third and final part of our Basics for New Users series, we covered the fundamentals of feature creation so that you can begin building your next great design. Now don't forget, there are some built-in tutorials in SOLIDWORKS. In the help category, you will find SOLIDWORKS tutorials. Those are a really great asset and a really good way to get familiar with new tools and techniques. And there's also an online help file that's available. So if you need to do a quick Google search, type in SOLIDWORKS help, you'll be able to find that website very quickly. And that's an excellent learning resource. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like, subscribe, or visit us at hawkridgesys.com, and be sure to check out our library of other videos for more advanced tips and tricks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.